Up until that stage, you are being taught civilian things, aren't you? By whom? By your parents? By what? Who else? Your teachers? Who else?
Church.
The church.
Authority.
If you're doing work, you start working. Work. Your sports, your coaches, all those things. All those people are inputting into your life, are they not? What are some of the civilian belief systems? Is it a rigid system? Is it a flexible system? Fairly flexible, isn't it? There's a little bit of a movement in the civilian system. All right. Flexible. We could put little discipline. There is discipline, but certainly not in the context of the military. Is everything black and white? There's shades of grey. There's shades of grey, so there's shades in between. What about yes and no? Is there anything in the middle? Is there such a thing as maybe? In the civilian world there is, isn't there? Perhaps, yeah, I might want to do that, but maybe I don't want to do that. So the civilian culture is very flexible. It's a bit like the bars of the cage we talked about. It's got some give, it's got some take. It's actually here, isn't it? It sort of swings that way and swings that way or whatever. At this age, I take you and I now subject you to this training. In other words, I subject you to the military. Military belief system. Is it flexible? What's the opposite to flexible? Ah, now you're starting to see the bars of your cage. What about the sort of wishy-washy discipline? High discipline. Shades of grey? Black and white. Maybe? Oh, you know, yes or no. And if it's no, and it should have been yes, what happens? Okay. So, you have a very strong system, a very firm military belief system. And as you can see, it is quite different than this one. At some stage, you're subjected to the war. Now remember, the reward for doing the war is life. That says what about the training? Okay, if it says that the training is brilliant, what does it then say about this belief system? It's perfectly the same, isn't it? Because this training is that belief system. So that is an absolutely brilliant plus, plus, plus system. Okay, and on you go with your life. There's the military person heading on and on and on. And we have the civilian person whose culture is very much how many of you wives here have been in the military? None. So you are all part of which culture? Okay. So what I'm saying here is that when that flexible civilian culture meets that rigid military culture, what are you going to have at each of these points? Conflict. How can I explain it? Let's use our imagination. Let's pretend that we're all young again, okay? We're back in our 20s, okay? We're all single. And this great benefactor says we're all off to Africa. Off we go to Africa. And there we go and we watch the Maasai warriors, you know. And you as the women, you see this Maasai prince. Square shoulders, tapered, waist, bun, perfect, glistening. And the young guys see the Maasai princess, you know, everything in the right place. And you fall in lust. And you actually marry. And they fall in lust with you and you get married. Tell me, how long do you think that relationship has got to last? Why? Two different what? What's that word? Two different cultures. What have we got here? Interesting, isn't it? So you're starting to get some pictures about what your last 20 or 30 years. So for you, those of you that are still hanging in there, those of you in the civilian culture that are still hanging in there with your militarised, cultured partner, pat yourself on the back. You've done a mighty, mighty brilliant job. Because in actual fact, as you can see, what you've really been dealing with is not so much Vietnam. All Vietnam actually did was reward you. The life of serving in there really said that this worked. What you've really been dealing with for so much of this time is not Vietnam and the memory of Vietnam. What you've actually been dealing with is this culture, this indoctrination, the brainwashing, this way that your partner sees the world. And you say, why now though? Now I talked to you about why now when this breaks through. But along this line, there has to be something that will make you think, realise that it isn't working. What's that? How do you know when this system is no longer working? Conflict until it reaches what sort of proportion or what level? Over. More than the anger, because you've had a few of these. It has to be greater than just the flashpoint little anger, doesn't it? It has to be almost equivalent to that. Your system has to recognise that you're in a state of conflict in this culture very similar to that. In other words, this has got to be powerful enough to make you realise what? That that's not working. These little ones here didn't make you realise that the military culture's not working anymore. They were little indicators, and remember in conflict resolution you have indicators. You need something happening that is powerful. Could be a separation, loss of your family, loss of your partner, loss of all sorts of things. But it has to be powerful enough for it to trigger in you something that says, hey, this is not working anymore. When that is triggered in you, you go through what sorts of emotions? What happens? How do you know when this is powerful enough to alert you that this is no longer working? Depression, all of those sorts of anxiety things.
Self-esteem, can't do anything.
Right, exactly right. All the symptoms of anxiety and depression, all the things that occur around post-traumatic stress. So you start to make some choices when you get to that. You can ignore it, as you have done there and there and there or wherever. But this is the one that you can no longer ignore. You have options. And one of the things you consider would be that option. What do you think that option is?
Suicide.
Thank you. Yes, suicide. Why do I put that in there? It is true, isn't it? One of the things you will consider when you are in this crisis at that point is to end it all. The best way to calm it down in my head and to get all of this in control is if I top myself, it all goes away. And many of our brothers have done that, have they not? But you've got to be clear that suicide is a considered option. It's a part of the process. You've also got this way. Where's that go towards? Yeah, isn't it funny? It just so happens that if you continue it on, it heads towards this sort of process. Right? And then you've got anywhere in between those. And it's going to be your choice. Things like this, all things like this course will do, will say that if you're at this point, then you've got choices. You can go from here, you can go to here, or anywhere in between. It is your choice. You've got to picture this almost as a rubber band. If you look at between here and here, like a big rubber band. You heard the term emotional numbing? And so I'm sure that some of your partners, some of your women, have thought that your veteran partner builds a wall around them. That when something happened to family, your veteran seems to switch off, like there's no emotion in there. Why that is very simple. When you're in this environment, one of the survival skills is to turn your emotions off. And in one of the letters that I wrote, it's like putting on an emotional suit of armour. Which means what?
Your feelings don't count.
Your feelings don't count. You don't have any. Because if you don't have any feelings, what can't happen to you? You can't be hurt. And so when you come back into the civilian world with your family, quite often what do you do to your family?
Turn off emotions.
Why do you do that?
Save yourself.
Because you think that if I don't let them into my life, I'm not going to get hurt like I got hurt here. It worked there. It was a survival skill here. Right? It is not a survival skill in this civilian world. So what happens, it's like a big rubber band that you stretch and stretch. Here you learn to switch off the emotions. You learn that it's a survival skill. And you go through your life and you see these little indicators that say it's not working, but you ignore them, you ignore them, you ignore them. You ignore them up to the point of a major crisis, which all of a sudden, this major crisis, is it a calm thing or is it highly emotional? Highly emotional. In other words, that rubber band has suddenly stretched to its limit and it's gone, bang. And you've suddenly been hit with the same intensity as here. Only the difference is this intensity taught you to switch off. This intensity is saying switching off doesn't work because I'm feeling all these emotions. Why isn't it working? Switching off worked. I've been switched off all the way through. Now I'm going through this. It doesn't work. And you start to see now what's happening. So why that breakdown is so debilitating, because what is it actually saying to you?
That system no longer works.
Yeah.
So I'm vulnerable.
Yeah, you're vulnerable again. That everything that held you together through this environment has failed. And this is why suicide is seen as an option. This is why your self-esteem suffers, because you believe, without actually saying it, all the indicators tell you that you failed. And the extreme form of failure, of course, is to do that, isn't it? The extreme form of escape. So in effect, take this rubber band and apply it back here. You have kept yourself up here for 10, 20 or 30 years. When that band breaks, what does it do to this? It starts to throw you back. At the extreme level of throwing you back, what's the ultimate form of flight? Suicide. So if it throws you back too far, you can end up at suicide. What it'll do, it'll throw you back beyond the flow, down to here. What you've got to do is recognise when it's heading this way, do something about it. These sorts of courses, this sort of behaviour, is to then to do what? You've swung back here, it's to bring you back where? Back to that flow. Now if you go back to that flow, what have you started to become? A civilian. So what you're doing now is there's your partner, and now there's you. And you can have your ups and downs together, and we won't discuss what they may be. But you follow, and all of a sudden, what you're aiming for out of this is to stop this clashing, and so you've got more of this. Now you will have your moments. You'd be silly to say it. But if you deal with the clash more appropriately, you work together. Those sorts of skills teach you that when you have these clashes, don't ignore them, deal with them appropriately. But let's have a look at some of the answers. The guidelines for survivors of war. First one is to talk about it. You may think you'll never stop hurting, but you will. So talking about it, that doesn't mean you go and tell everybody, but what it means is you talk to your partner. You start to open up yourself. Your children actually want to know. Now that doesn't mean that you talk to them about the gory worries. You talk to them about comradeship. You talk to them about fear, because war is about fear. You talk